On February 28, 1994, during the conflict in the former Yugoslavia, NATO carries out its first ever military action. In 1949, the US, Canada, and 10 European nations formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, as a safeguard against Soviet aggression. An important part of this compact is called Article 5. This requires each NATO member to treat an attack on one as an attack on all. Article 5 is what really gives NATO its strength. So far in history, NATO's Article 5 has been invoked only once. This occurred after the US was attacked on September 11, 2001, when NATO responded by deploying troops to Afghanistan. At the time NATO formed in 1949, not surprisingly, the Soviet Union felt the need to respond. The result was the Warsaw Pact, formed in 1955, which included the Soviet Union and its communist satellite states. With the end of the Cold War, NATO was reconceived as a cooperative security organization with two main objectives. One, to foster dialogue and cooperation with the former Warsaw Pact adversaries, and two, to manage conflicts on the European periphery. This, of course, would include the Balkan Peninsula, where the former Yugoslavia was located. This retooled post-Cold War NATO could thereby use military forces for peacekeeping missions in countries outside the alliance. NATO's first ever military action came after the end of the Cold War, when member nations agreed to enforce UN resolutions enacted to bring about an end to the bloody conflict in the former Yugoslavia, which began breaking up at the end of the Cold War. NATO enacted a no-fly zone over Bosnia and Herzegovina as a part of this effort. On February 28, 1994, U.S. fighter planes shot down 4 Serbian warplanes engaged in a bombing mission in violation of that no-fly zone. Throughout 1994 and 1995, NATO planes continued to enforce the no-fly zone and strike at Serb military positions and airfields. In November 1995, Bosnia, Croatia, and Serbia agreed to a peace agreement known as the Dayton Accords. Historically, agreements of this kind are named after the city where they are signed. This agreement was signed in Paris. So, why the Dayton Accords? Well, there have been many peace agreements signed in Paris throughout history. From the 1763 treaty that ended the 7 Years' War, to the 1783 treaty that ended the American Revolutionary War, to the 1973 agreement that ended U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Thus, although signed in Paris, the 1995 peace agreement between Bosnia, Croatia, and Serbia was negotiated at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base outside Dayton, Ohio. Thus, the Dayton Accords. This certainly helps to avoid confusion by having yet another Paris peace agreement. A month later, NATO deployed 60,000 troops to enforce the Accords, replacing a UN force. In 1999, NATO returned to action in the former Yugoslavia, specifically in Serbia, although it was still technically known as Yugoslavia at that time. Anyway, NATO forces were pressed into action against Yugoslavia during the Kosovo War. NATO's intervention was prompted by Yugoslavia's ethnic cleansing of Kosovar Albanians, which drove the Albanians into neighboring countries and had the potential to destabilize the region. Yugoslavia's leader, Slobodan Milosevic, was charged with war crimes for his actions in Kosovo. He became the first sitting head of state so charged. Milosevic was forced from power in the year 2000 and faced an international tribunal. While the trial was taking place in 2006, Milosevic died in his cell in The Hague. The Warsaw Pact dissolved with the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 at the end of the Cold War. Russian President Vladimir Putin has always seen NATO as a threat. So, Russia and its allies formed the Collective Security Treaty Organization, or CSTO, in 2002. It's essentially the post-Cold War version of the Warsaw Pact. It includes just 6 members: Russia, Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. The CSTO has its own version of NATO's Article 5. I guess in case Greece, I don't know, decides to invade Kyrgyzstan at some point or something. Anyway, NATO is as important now as it has ever been. The evidence of this is clear with Russia's war in Ukraine, which was 3 years old at the time I made this video. There's a reason that in 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin did not attack the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, who were, like Ukraine, former Soviet republics, even though they would have likely been easier targets than Ukraine. Putin's Russia also did not attack Poland or Romania. One clear reason why is that they all have joined NATO since the end of the Cold War. Putin is smart enough to realize that, as easy as it might seem for big bad Russia to take on little Estonia, there would be a response from Estonia's NATO allies, and so that would be a bad idea. The 2 newest members of NATO are Finland and Sweden, who decided to join after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Any new member must receive unanimous approval from the current members. Turkey and Hungary held out for a while on Finland and Sweden, but they both gave approval first to Finland and then to Sweden. This brings NATO to 32 current members, 20 more than it started with back in 1949. On a personal level, at the time of that first NATO military action in 1994, I was living in Italy. I was there as a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, having arrived just 4 weeks earlier. Many of the planes involved in enforcing the no-fly zone took off from bases in Italy. I was concerned that due to the proximity of the conflict, we missionaries could get sent home for safety reasons. Fortunately, that did not happen, and I had an amazing experience in Italy for those 2 years. This past summer, I was able to go back to Italy for the first time, as the lovely Mrs. Lewis and I both celebrated turning 50. We had a spectacular time. Here are other events that happened today in history. In 1859, a new Arkansas law requires free blacks to leave the state or become enslaved for 1 year. In 1953, James Watson and Francis Crick announced their discovery of the double helix structure of DNA. In 1977, a deranged fan attacks musician Ray Charles on stage and tries to strangle him with a rope. In 1983, the finale of MASH airs on CBS, reaching a TV viewer rating that has not been surpassed. In 1993, federal agents launch a raid against a compound in Waco, Texas, leading to a 51-day standoff. In 2013, worldwide Catholic leader Pope Benedict XVI resigns, the first pope to do so since 1415. In 2023, a passenger train and a freight train collide in Greece just before midnight, killing 57 people. And now it's time for our Today in History quiz. During which conflict did the U.S. gain control of Puerto Rico? The Mexican-American War, the Spanish-American War, World War I, or World War II? Think you know the answer? Drop your guesses in the comments below. Find out if you're right next time on Today in History.